He should have frozen. He should have given up. But when they found him buried in snow, body trembling, one paw draped over something small, they realized this was no ordinary dog. This was a soldier without a uniform. A German shepherd who hadn't eaten in days, who bled beneath his fur, but who refused to move because under his chest a tiny life still breathed. And when they saw what he was protecting, they screamed. What follows is a story of loyalty, survival, and the kind of love that makes angels weep. Before we begin, tell us where in the world you're watching from. If you believe that even in the coldest places, warmth can be found in the heart of a dog, hit that subscribe button, share this story, and let's remind the world what real courage looks like. Big Sky, Montana. Elevation 7,218 feet. Temperature 8 degrees Fahrenheit and falling. The storm had arrived 2 days early, roaring over the mountain range like a freight train full of ice. The narrow service road that wound through Gallatin Canyon was now barely visible beneath 6 in of fresh powder, with more falling every minute. Trees creaked beneath the weight of snow. The world was white and silence reigned. Dalton was broad-shouldered and square-jawed, the kind of man who carried the storm in his bones and never said much unless it mattered. His gray fleece jacket bore the county wildlife emblem, faded from years of patrol. He leaned forward in the driver's seat, squinting into the storm. Beside him, slouched in the passenger seat, sat Elijah Eli Boone, a wildlife technician in his late 22s with a wiry build, shaggy blonde hair and restless hands that tapped against his thermos. He'd grown up on a horse ranch and could read animal tracks like lines in a book. Though smart and sharp-eyed, Eli was still considered green by Dalton's standards. He was also the first to speak. "That wasn't a coyote," he said, straightening up. Dalton grunted. "Number, that was something else." They followed the sound, trudging off-road with snowshoes, flashlights slicing through the swirling white. The wind tore at their coats, howled through the pines, but the sound came again, closer this time. It was Eli who spotted the shape first, a dark mound near the base of a ridge, partially buried. "There," he said, and began moving faster. When they reached it, the sight stopped them both. A dog, large German shepherd, body curled tightly, half buried in drift. One paw stretched protectively over a smaller shape nestled against its chest. The big dog's fur was matted with ice, breath shallow and slow, eyes half-lidded but alert. When Dalton reached forward, the dog let out a low, ragged growl, not of aggression but of desperation. The smaller shape moved. A pup, perhaps 4 or 5 weeks old, trembling under the shield of the older dog's body. Its fur was reddish-brown, the kind that might belong to a shepherd mix. It whimpered softly, then went still again. Dalton crouched, his voice quiet. "Easy now, boy. We're not going to hurt you." He removed his glove and slowly reached out. The big shepherd made no move to bite, only flicked his ear in recognition of the gesture. "Jesus," Eli whispered. "He's been lying like that for days, hasn't he? Looks that way." They didn't dare move them yet. First warmth. Eli ran back to the truck while Dalton stayed behind, slowly brushing away the snow from around the dogs. The storm swirled higher up the ridge, wind whipping Dalton's coat and stinging his cheeks. The German shepherd's name was unknown, but something in his eyes said he knew them, not as men, but as rescue. Still, he didn't shift an inch, even as warmth approached. Eli returned with an insulated thermal blanket and the portable heat mat they kept in the truck. "We'll have to load them slow," he said, one at a time. "Not going to work," Dalton said, his eyes locked with the dog's. "He won't leave the pup, not until it's safe." Eli hesitated and gave a small nod. "Then we carry them together." It was a tight fit in the back of the truck. They converted the bed into a temporary recovery space, lined it with blankets, activated the heat mat, and placed both dogs in the corner. The shepherd's body curled around the pup again almost instinctively. He let out a soft, exhausted sigh. Dalton closed the truck bed and thumped the roof. "Let's move." By the time they reached the county wildlife station on the edge of town, the snow had thickened into a near whiteout. Waiting in the small garage bay, already prepped thanks to the radio call, was Dr. Emily Hayes, 37 years old, tall and willow-thin, with deep brown eyes and a streak of white hair running through her auburn ponytail. Her heavy green jacket was patched at the elbows, and her gloved hands moved with clinical calm. Emily had once led a wildlife rescue unit in Arizona before returning to her hometown to care for her ailing father. Since his death 2 winters ago, she'd stayed, finding solace in the quiet of the mountains and the company of the wounded. When she saw the shepherd, her breath caught. Oh my God. She crouched immediately, running her hand gently over his head. He's guarding him still. Dalton nodded, wouldn't move, even as he froze. They transferred both dogs to the exam room inside. Emily worked fast, placing warming pads under the pup and checking its vitals. Male, she said. 5 weeks, dehydrated, borderline hypothermic. No visible fractures, no ID tag. Her assistant, Raymond Lee, a soft-spoken college student with wide eyes and a round face, gently cleaned the shepherd's paws. He's got torn pads, bruised ribs, and old lacerations. But this isn't recent. Emily's hand froze on the dog's neck. Wait, there's something under his collar. She tugged gently and found it. A tiny strip of metal, barely legible. 2 words etched into it. Protect him. No one spoke. Eli finally broke the silence. So what now? Emily looked down at the shepherd, who was watching her with unwavering amber eyes. She touched his cheek. Now we listen to what he's been trying to tell us. The snow had thickened, turning from flurries into an unrelenting cascade of white. By the time Deputy Dalton, Eli, and Emily had loaded both dogs into the truck bed, visibility had dropped to less than 20 feet. The road that led back to town, already treacherous, was now buried under drifts and black ice. Even with chains on the tires, Dalton wasn't willing to risk the winding switchbacks that curled down the canyon in this storm. We're not going anywhere tonight, he said flatly, voice muffled through his scarf. Emily looked from the dashboard GPS to the icy void outside the windshield. There's a service cabin about a mile up. It's off-grid, but it's stocked. It'll be safer than trying to push through. They agreed without further debate. Dalton eased the truck forward tires crunching through snow while the heater blasted hot air into the cab. In the back, wrapped in thermal blankets, Ranger and the pup lay side by side on the portable warming mat. The older dog had not moved since being placed there. He only opened his eyes briefly whenever the wind shook the truck frame as if assessing danger. The pup, smaller than a farmhouse cat, had curled tightly into his chest. When they reached the Ranger cabin, the world outside had dimmed to a ghostly blue. The wind screamed across the windows as Dalton reversed the truck into the side. Leaned to the cabin was a single-story wood structure with a slanted tin roof walls coated in decades of pine sap and wind. The chimney was long since abandoned, but a solar-powered battery system kept an emergency light alive above the door. Inside, the temperature hovered just above freezing. Eli rushed to plug in the backup heater while Dalton hauled in supplies from the truck. Emily followed with the crate, holding the 2 dogs, gently placing it near the heater's coil. I'll prep the portable E for fluids, she said, unzipping her med pack. Her hands moved automatically, but her eyes never left the shepherd. He's still alert, but barely. Eli hunched over the cabin's storage bin, produced a dented thermos and several heating packs. Still nothing on the radio. No chance of calling for evac tonight. Emily knelt by the pup. She gently lifted its head, examining its gums, then ran her hand along its spine. Dehydrated, but not starving. Someone was feeding him, at least until recently. She paused. Wait, what? Eli came over. Emily lifted the pup again and gently turned its side toward the lantern light. Just beneath the left foreleg, hidden under thick fur, a faint scar, not from an accident, clean surgical. Her brows knit as she reached into her pocket and retrieved a penlight. I've seen this before, she murmured. Dalton raised his head from where Emily exhaled slowly. From here, this scar, I did this. She stood, walking to her vet bag and pulling out a weathered leather journal. She flipped through pages lined with case notes, sketches, and tiny paw print stamps. Finally, she landed on a page dated 7 weeks ago. Shepherd mix puppy male. Estimated 3 weeks old. Treated for mild dehydration and flea dermatitis. No tag brought in anonymously, left overnight in crate, but there's no record of discharge. Dalton noted. Exactly, Emily said. Someone took him without telling me. Someone who didn't want paperwork. Eli frowned. You think it was stolen? Maybe. Or maybe someone didn't want to leave a trace. But if this is the same pup, then that dog, she gestured to Ranger, didn't just find him. He's been protecting him for weeks. They fell silent for a moment. Outside, the wind slammed against the walls as if trying to get in. Ranger stirred slightly. His breath fogged in the cold, but he didn't shift position. The pup let out a small, sharp whine, and Emily instinctively reached to comfort it. "That engraving on the collar," Eli said suddenly. "Protect him." Could it be from whoever dropped the pup off? Emily shook her head. No tag, no note. But maybe they meant it for Ranger. Maybe he's more than just a dog. Maybe he was trained to protect something precious. Dalton returned from checking the door. Well, he succeeded. Pup's still alive, barely. Emily looked back at the German Shepherd. Even from the corner with the heater humming, she could see his exhaustion. But it was the kind of weariness she knew well. The kind that didn't come from just cold or hunger, but from choosing to stay awake long past your limits. Choosing to guard something instead of giving in, she moved to the edge of the crate and placed a bowl of warm glucose solution inside. "Let's see if you'll take this, big guy." Ranger didn't move at first, then slowly one ear flicked. He lifted his head just enough to sniff the bowl. A few seconds passed, then his tongue dipped in once, twice, enough to register interest. "He's not out of the woods," she said softly. "But that's something." Hours passed. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and they resigned themselves to a night in the cabin. Ranger drank a bit more. The pup began twitching gently in sleep, and Emily, seated in a folding chair near the crate, finally allowed herself to rest her back against the wall. She watched them, two survivors, bound together by something no one yet understood. The blizzard had not relented by morning. Dawn brought no light, only a diluted grayness that blurred the lines between forest and sky. Inside the ranger cabin, the generator hummed softly, while a makeshift space heater sputtered heat across the wooden floor. Ranger lay still, curled around the puppy, whose belly now rose and fell with steadier rhythm. Eli slept with a blanket wrapped around his shoulders in the corner, while Dalton sipped weak coffee near the window, watching ice crawl across the panes. Emily sat beside the crate, eyes fixed on the German Shepherd, noting the way his breathing had shifted, less labored but far from strong. When she reached in to check his temperature again, her fingers brushed against a small patch of fur on his flank and felt the raised ridge beneath, a scar newer than the others. She leaned in, parting the matted hair. The wound was nearly healed, but jagged with sutures that didn't look veterinary, more like field stitching, not by her hand or anyone trained. "Dalton," she said without looking up, "come see this." He approached silently. She pressed his hand to the same spot. "That's no accident." Dalton's brow furrowed. "Knife or wire, maybe barbed, but it's been sewn up. Someone cared enough to close it, but not enough to bring him in." As she spoke, Ranger stirred slightly, his ears twitching, his eyes, amber and unreadable, opened just enough to meet hers. Then softly he growled, not at her, at something else, at the window. Dalton instinctively turned. "What's out there?" The growl subsided, but Ranger didn't break his stare. His body tensed as though expecting something or someone. Emily moved to the window, brushing condensation from the glass. Snow still fell heavily, but in the clearing about 20 feet from the cabin, she saw something faint. A dark line too straight to be natural. Dalton grabbed a flashlight and stepped out. Eli followed, wiping the sleep from his eyes. They found it quickly, a trail of frozen blood, thin, brittle, already fading beneath new snow, but unmistakable. It led into the trees toward the ridge. "Could be from Ranger," Eli offered. Emily shook her head. "No, this isn't old enough. He's been with us since last night. This is fresh." Dalton exchanged a look with her. "We follow it, just far enough to know where it goes." They geared up and left Ranger and the pup in the cabin, barricading the door and leaving Emily's number scrolled on the inside panel in case someone arrived. The wind bit at their cheeks as they followed the trail, weaving between pines heavy with snow. The blood dots grew more spaced out, but they held. It wasn't until they reached a patch of frozen brush beneath a leaning fir that they saw it clearly. The snow had been disturbed, scattered as if something had collapsed or thrashed. There was a broken branch nearby, and under it, partially buried in ice, they found fur, black, coarse, not from a deer or wolf, dog hair. Dalton knelt, brushing frost away, another patch of blood, and something else shredded fabric, a piece of a jacket sleeve. "Someone was here," he muttered, "and hurt." Eli scanned the trees. But why leave? And where did they go? Emily's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out. Signal had returned faintly. One missed call. No ID. A moment later it rang again. She answered. The voice on the other end was male, mid-range, unfamiliar, calm, but strained. You have them, don't you? Emily's hand tightened around the phone. Who is this? The black dog. The small brown one. You have them? Her voice dropped. Who are you? I'm the one who lost them, the man said, and now I want them back. Emily signaled to Dalton, who immediately motioned for Eli to silence. If you care about them, tell me who you are. Come forward. But the line went dead. No sound, no click, just silence. They returned to the cabin with increased urgency. Ranger had risen slightly when they arrived, head lifted, growling low and steady. The pup whimpered, but stayed curled close. We're not alone out here, Dalton said. Eli glanced toward the ridge. You think someone's watching us? I think someone's been watching for a while. Emily replayed the words in her head. The caller had known what the dogs looked like, too detailed for coincidence. And if he had access to their location, either he had been nearby, or he was part of something larger. Back in the cabin, Emily pulled a dog brush from her kit and began gently cleaning the pup's fur. Underneath the dirt, small burrs and crusted blood, the pup's coat was soft and even, well-groomed once. She looked at Ranger again. You didn't just stumble across him, she said aloud. You were assigned to him or trained for him. That's what this is, isn't it? The shepherd's gaze didn't leave her. Then he did something that stopped them all. He rose, shakily, legs trembling, but he stood, still weak but driven by something deeper than strength. He turned toward the cabin door and stared. Dalton stepped forward. You want us to follow, Ranger? Let out a quiet whine. Then he pawed at the door once, just once. The storm had finally broken. By late morning the skies had calmed into a pale, heavy gray, and the snow fell soft, no longer blinding. Ranger stood near the cabin door, his body still unsteady, but his posture firm, watchful. When Dalton opened the door, the shepherd took one slow step forward onto the ice-packed porch, sniffed the air, and looked back at them, waiting. They followed him in silence, staying close and keeping their pace slow for his sake. The blood trail had faded under the new snow, but Ranger seemed to remember the direction, veering off the main path and down an overgrown service trail that hadn't been cleared in years. The terrain sloped downward into a shallow ravine where the skeletal remains of a split-rail fence emerged from the white, guiding them toward something unnatural. Rusted metal, broken cinder blocks, and what looked like the bones of a forgotten outpost. It had once been a compound, a cluster of prefabricated buildings now sunken into the ground, their roofs bowed under the weight of snow and time. One structure still bore a crooked sign, its letters faded, but legible Sable Ridge Wildlife Care Center. Dalton frowned. That place was shut down 5 years ago. Emily nodded grimly. For animal welfare violations, we used to send rescues here until the audit. As they moved closer, Eli broke off toward a half-collapsed kennel run on the south side. The wire mesh had been torn outward like something had forced its way through from inside. This wasn't age or weather, he said. Something fought to get out. Inside the nearest structure, the smell hit first mildew urine, the long decayed scent of neglect. The walls were stained, and the light that filtered through the broken windows was weak and cold. They stepped cautiously over piles of newspaper, empty feed bags, shattered crates. Emily spotted something under a toppled shelf, a crumpled fleece blanket. She knelt, lifting it gently, and found the corner stained deep red. A familiar smell clung to it, coppery sharp and distinctly canine. Ranger's scent, she murmured. Dalton crouched beside her. You sure? She nodded. He bled here. Ranger himself stood frozen just beyond the threshold ears, backtail still breathing heavy. He didn't enter. Instead, he whined a low, almost pained sound and turned his head away. Eli returned with a small bundle in his hands, a collar torn at the buckle with a bent ID tag barely hanging on. There's a name, he said, squinting. Mo. Emily took the tag and turned it over. The backside had a clinic code etched into it. Her clinic. This dog was registered through me, but I never saw this collar. I never treated a Milo. They searched deeper into the compound, pushing through moldy files and splintered furniture until they reached what had once been the main office. The room was windowless, but a filing cabinet in the back had been forced open. Most of the folders were gone, burned, or removed, but one had slipped behind the cabinet, half crushed and damp. Emily pulled it free and flipped through the brittle pages. "Intake logs," she said, scanning, but no discharge records. "Look at this. These dogs were signed and assigned temporary ID codes, and then nothing. No transfers, no adoptions, no deaths reported." Dalton's face darkened. So where did they go? As if answering the question, Ranger stepped forward into the room and walked slowly to the far corner. There, under a thin layer of frost, was a dented stainless steel dog bowl. He nudged it once with his snout, then backed away and sat down, staring at them. Eli crouched, brushing snow aside, revealing more of the floor, a series of parallel scratch marks, long and erratic, like claws scrabbling for escape. "This isn't a shelter," Emily said quietly. "It was a warehouse," Dalton straightened, "and Ranger was here." They emerged from the building and continued their sweep of the grounds. Toward the edge of the property, past the last line of collapsed fencing, Eli called out again, "Over here." They joined him at the base of a tree where he held up a metal hook, half buried in the dirt attached to a frayed rope. Nearby, an old transport cage lay on its side, broken open, its hinges splintered. "There was a struggle," Eli said, "and someone didn't want them found." Emily's phone buzzed in her coat pocket. A text message, this time from an unknown number. "Stay out of this. You don't know what you're walking into." She showed the message to Dalton. He stared at the phone, jaw tightening. "Looks like someone's afraid we'll find the rest." In the truck, Emily sat beside Ranger, her hand resting gently on his back. "You escaped," she said softly. "You saved the puppy. You brought us here." The shepherd didn't move, but she could feel the tension in his shoulders, the readiness, the burden. "He was trained," she added, thinking aloud. "Not just a rescue dog, a therapy dog, maybe even more. That's why he was at that compound." Eli turned around from the front seat. "How do you know?" Emily reached into her bag and produced an old laminated flyer creased and folded from years in her field kit. On the front was a photo of a German shepherd in a blue vest beside a young boy in a wheelchair. The caption read, "Therapy Partners Bridging Hope." She placed the flyer beside Ranger. "That's you, isn't it?" The dog closed his eyes and for the first time let out a sound, not a growl or whine, but a breath. Long, steady, like release. The wind had gone quiet again, leaving the forest still and heavy. Tree branches sagged under new snow, and every breath the team took rose in clouds. Emily walked slightly ahead of the others, her boots crunching softly as they moved downhill from the ruins of Sable Ridge. Ranger walked beside her, limping but insistent. He'd refused to rest since they left the site, and now his pace quickened with each step. He kept glancing to his left toward the deep slope of a ravine that split from the old trail. Dalton caught up his rifle slung behind his shoulder, not for threat but for precaution. "Where's he taking us now?" he asked, breath fogging the air. Eiley didn't answer. She didn't have to. She could see it in Rers's movements, his ears upright, head low, nose cutting through air, as if memory itself had a scent. She felt her chest tighten. Ranger wasn't just tracking, he was reliving something. They came to a break in the treeing where the snow deepened suddenly. Ranger stopped and looked up at them. One paw lifted, then he barked just once, sharp, urgent. Eli arrived last, holding a portable radio that had finally picked up a weak signal. "Still no dispatch reply," he muttered, but trailed off when he saw where they stood. The ground sloped downward in a gentle drift leading to what looked like a snow-covered embankment. A strip of road barely visible ran beneath it, and something metallic glinted under the white. Vehicle, Dalton said they descended carefully, the crusted snow cracking beneath their steps. At the base, half buried, was the roof of a silver SUV. The snow had drifted over most of the vehicle, but a side mirror stuck out cracked and frosted. Emily reached the driver's side, brushing snow away from the window with her sleeve. Inside was darkness. Then she saw the outline of a face, still frozen female. Her breath caught. "There's someone inside." Dalton pried open the driver's door while Eli moved to the passenger side. The cold air that rushed out was sharp with the smell of old plastic gasoline and something fainter, like wet wool and milk. Inside, the woman sat slumped, face pale and blue hands still clutched around the steering wheel. She couldn't have been more than 30. A brunette with delicate features, her face etched with a kind of quiet desperation, even in death. Emily's voice cracked. She's been here for days. Behind her, Eli opened the back seat and found a canvas diaper bag. He unzipped it and pulled out a bottle of powdered milk, a pack of formula, and wrapped tightly in a Ziploc, a small baby blanket with paw prints. She was traveling with the pup, he murmured. She brought supplies for him. Dalton stepped back, drawing in the full scope of the scene. The snow covered the car. Nobody knew she was here. Ranger let out a low sound, a half whine, half chuff, and moved to the rear of the vehicle. There, beneath a ridge of snow and ice, was a cell phone, cracked screen, dead battery, but the case had a faded sticker, "Adopt Don't Shop." They brought it back to the truck and plugged it into Eli's charger. The screen lit up dimly, and after several failed tries, Emily guessed the passcode 1102. A child's birthday. The phone unlocked. There were messages. The last outgoing text was never sent frozen in the outbox. He took the other dogs. "I'm going to find Milo. If I don't come back, tell someone. His name is Ranger. He's not just a dog. He's trained. He'll protect him." Emily's hand trembled slightly as she opened the photo gallery. The last image had been taken just a few days earlier. The woman smiling in front of the SUV, holding the brown puppy, smaller than he was, now wrapped in the same blanket Eli had found. In the background, Ranger stood alert, ears forward, wearing no collar, no vest. "Her name's Cassie," Emily said quietly. "Cassie Monroe. I recognize her now. She brought in stray dogs 2 years ago during the spring floods. Sweet, soft-spoken. She always wanted to foster but didn't have the means. I think she finally did." Eli leaned over her shoulder. She mentioned he took the other dogs. That has to be her ex. Dalton nodded grimly. "And if he's tied to Sable Ridge, then she probably found out what they were doing and ran." Emily looked at Ranger, and he followed. Ranger stared back. Then slowly, as if the moment deserved reverence, he laid down beside the blanket. His tail didn't wag, but his eyes softened, and he closed them. They returned to the wildlife station in silence. Snow had lightened to a drifting whisper, but the sky remained low and gray. The roads had been plowed just enough to allow a slow descent back to town, where the main office stood in a grove of firs like a sentinel. Ranger lay quietly in the back of the truck bed beside the pup, who now stirred more regularly, its breath stronger with each passing hour. Emily rode in the passenger seat, Cassie's phone in her coat pocket, her fingers absently brushing over it as though trying to warm something far colder than glass. They reached the station by late afternoon. As Dalton pulled in, they noticed a black SUV already waiting outside. A man stood beside it, tall and lean, wearing a tailored coat far too thin for the weather and holding a manila folder in gloved hands. Emily tensed immediately. "Who the hell is that?" Eli stepped down from the truck. "Looks like he's been waiting for a while." The man approached with a calm, purposeful stride. His name, he said, was Victor Kane, mid-40s, olive skin, dark hair peppered with gray at the temples, eyes so light they looked colorless. He wore wire-rimmed glasses and carried himself with an air of practiced civility. "Dr. Hayes," he greeted Emily, extending the folder. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Dalton stepped between them. "State your business." Victor offered a faint smile. "I represent a private canine recovery service contracted with a defunct rescue operation in Missoula. The German Shepherd you're harboring was part of an experimental therapy program and was marked missing. I've brought the recovery paperwork and reacquisition authorization." Emily took the folder, flipping through the pages. The documents looked official, typed, stamped, even notarized, but something in her gut twisted. "Where's your license to transport across county lines, and who exactly contracted you?" Victor's smile didn't waver. "Unfortunately, the organization was absorbed into a private entity before litigation could be completed. I'm not at liberty to disclose their name." "That's convenient," Dalton muttered. Behind them, Ranger began to growl, low at first, then louder throat rumbling as he stood and stepped down from the truck bed, positioning himself in front of the puppy. His body stiffened, ears pinned, teeth bared. It was not fear, it was fury. Victor's eyes flicked to the dog. He remembers. Emily stepped back now, gripping the collar with both hands. She crouched beside Ranger, one hand gently running under the leather where it met fur brushing past the tag marked "Protect Him." Something sharp pricked her thumb. A chip, she murmured. Eli appeared beside her with the portable scanner from inside the station. Emily held it over the collar base. A faint beep. The screen lit up. Add VTR 2410. Registered Valor Therapeutic Rehabilitation Program. Status terminated. Handler discontinued. Custody unassigned. Dalton leaned over her shoulder. Unassigned? Doesn't say Kane. Emily turned back to Victor. According to this, he has no listed owner. He's not yours. Victor's voice cooled. You don't understand what that dog is. He's not a pet. He's property developed, trained, and maintained under private funding. He's a controlled asset. Ranger snarled. Emily stood stepping between them. He's a living creature, and judging by the scars and behavior, he was mistreated. This chip proves only that he was discarded. Victor's expression darkened. You're interfering with recovery protocol. That's a violation of Dalton raised a hand. Enough. You can take your protocol and leave. The dog stays. Victor opened his mouth to protest when another vehicle pulled into the lot. A white SUV marked Gallatin County Animal Welfare Division. The woman who stepped out was in her early 52nds, broad-shouldered and composed. Her name was Sarah Kendrick, the newly appointed regional welfare supervisor. She wore a thick utility jacket, khaki pants, and heavy snow boots. Her blonde-gray hair was pulled back in a utilitarian bun, and her expression was unreadable. Sarah was known for being strict but fair, her reputation forged by uncovering abuse at a private zoo in Idaho 5 years earlier, an event that hardened her views on private animal ownership. She glanced at the scene, the growling dog, the folder in Victor's hands, the guarded stance of the others. I got a call, she said to Dalton. Someone reported a transport violation involving an unlicensed handler. That you, Dalton, didn't flinch. That be him. Victor stepped forward, irritation barely masked. Officer Kendrick, I assure you I'm acting within recovery parameters. Sarah held up a hand already scanning the folder he handed her. This paperwork isn't valid in this county in this program. She tapped the header was shut down. I know. I helped write the final report. Victor's jaw clenched. Sarah turned to Emily. Dr. Hayes, you're in possession of a chipped animal from a defunct agency. Current law states that custody reverts to local authorities for reassessment. If the animal is stable and not dangerous, you may proceed with placement or extended care. Emily nodded. Understood? Sarah gave a short nod and stepped closer to Ranger, crouching. You remember me? She asked softly. You were at the Missoula site, weren't you? You were quieter then. Ranger didn't growl. He lowered his head slowly, as if recognizing her scent. Sarah reached forward and gently ran her hand along his back, stopping over one of the healing scars. Her voice was soft. No one's taking you again. Not like that. Victor exhaled sharply. This isn't over. Sarah straightened. It is today. Leave. Victor hesitated, but with 3 witnesses, a county vehicle, and a dog still poised to defend the pup behind him, he turned and walked briskly to his SUV. Gravel crunched under his boots as he drove off, tires spinning slightly in the packed snow. Dalton watched him go. He'll be back, Sarah looked at Emily. So will I to file the official transfer. Ranger relaxed, finally settling into the snow eyes on the pup. Emily placed a blanket over both of them and whispered, Not property, not anymore. 2 days had passed since Victor Kane drove away in silence, and the storm clouds that had loomed over Big Sky for a week finally broke into sunlight. Snow still clung stubbornly to rooftops and roadsides, but the air was lighter now, crisp, clean, and no longer filled with threats. At the wildlife station, Ranger lay near the front desk on a thick navy fleece blanket. The small brown puppy curled tightly into his side. The pup, now more alert, chewed clumsily at a soft toy Emily had brought in from her clinic. Ranger watched him with quiet attentiveness, his breathing, steady, ears twitching with every movement around him. Inside the office, the atmosphere had shifted from tense to focused. Emily sat at her desk scrolling through scanned files, newspaper clippings, and archived emails. A local reporter had been calling repeatedly for an interview about the snow dog with the heart of a soldier, but Emily had politely declined every time. She wasn't ready to make this story public, at least not yet. Deputy Scott Dalton leaned against the doorway, arms folded. You know the sheriff's going to want to issue a statement. "I know," Emily replied, "but let's get the facts clean first." That morning, the sheriff's department had received a report from Detective Marcus Hale, a middle-aged investigator from the Gallatin County Sheriff's Office. Marcus was tall, weathered, and dressed in layers of brown flannel and denim that hadn't changed in 20 years. He was known for being sharp, patient, and immune to flattery, especially when dealing with animal abuse cases. A dog lover himself, Marcus had once been suspended for adopting a K-9 unit without proper clearance. That compassion hadn't faded with time. Marcus entered the office, removing his gloves and tucking them into his belt. "I ran the trace on Kane," he said, handing a folder to Emily. "His real name's Victor Leo. Changed it after a sealed charge 10 years ago in Oregon. Neglect and unauthorized breeding in a behavioral research program. Case never saw court. Victims were all animals." Emily felt her hands clench. "So he's not just opportunistic, he's a repeat offender." "Exactly. And get this," Marcus continued. "That puppy, we matched the DNA to hair strands found in Cassie Monroe's apartment. He's hers, confirmed. But Riz's chip confirms he was transferred months ago under fraudulent paperwork, which makes him stolen." Dalton stepped in. "So, we're officially looking at 2 victims and a suspect with a history." Marcus nodded, "and a potential trafficking network operating under the guise of therapy training. I already sent the file to the DA." Emily looked toward Ranger. He kept that puppy alive in a blizzard. He shielded him, starved for him, bled for him, all while running from someone trying to claim him as property, which makes him more than a victim, Marcus said. "It makes him a witness." Emily blinked. "Legally, can a dog be a witness?" Marcus smirked. "Not in the traditional sense, but his physical condition, the GPS data, the recovered footage, everything points to his direct experience being crucial, and that makes him untouchable by the likes of Kane." That afternoon, Sarah Kendrick returned. She stepped into the station with her signature brisk energy clipboard in hand, her breath steaming in the winter air. Her presence always felt like the swing of a judge's gavel, quiet but final. "I filed the transfer paperwork," she announced. "Ranger is now officially under the protection of the Gallatin County Animal Welfare Division, which means no one touches him without court review." She knelt beside Ranger, running a practiced hand along his back. "You did good, old boy." Emily turned to her. "What happens next?" Sarah stood. "We compile the evidence. The report on Sable Ridge, the photos from the compound, Cassie Monroe's messages, the vehicle site, the cell phone, the files you found. Kane doesn't know it yet, but the walls are already closing in." Dalton walked over to the front counter where the local newspaper, the Gallatin Sentinel, had left a copy. The front page headline read, "Mr. Shepard saves puppy in storm, a hero in fur." "Too bad the real story's darker than they know," he muttered. Sarah tilted her head. "Sometimes the darkness makes the light stand out more." Before she left, Sarah handed Emily a microchip registration update. "I added your name as co-guardian." Emily blinked. "What? You've earned it. And so has he." Later that evening, a small ceremony was held quietly in the town's municipal office. No cameras, no reporters, just a few people who mattered. Ranger stood on all fours, head high, wearing a simple blue collar. Emily held the puppy, now named Ash, short for Ashwood, where he'd first been found, tucked warmly in a gray knit blanket. Sheriff Lamb, a gruff but soft-spoken man with a military background and a fondness for working dogs, presented Emily with a framed certificate that read, "For exceptional loyalty and courage, Ranger Gallatin County." He looked down at the dog. "You remind us all what bravery really looks like." Ranger tilted his head. The room for a moment was still, and then Ash barked just once, a small high sound. Ranger turned toward him, touched noses gently, and then sat down. Spring came late to Big Sky that year. Snow still lined the shaded side of the hills, and the wind carried the bite of winter, even as crocuses pushed up through thawing soil. The wildlife station had changed in small but meaningful ways. Windows now bore colorful paw-print decals, and a hand-painted wooden sign above the side building read, "Hollow Creek Refuge for the Lost and Loyal." Emily Hayes stood on the gravel path that led to the converted barn. She wore her usual field jacket over faded jeans, her auburn hair twisted into a loose braid. Her boots were muddy, but her eyes shone. Since Ranger's rescue and the trial that followed, she'd used her veterinary background and growing support from the county to open a small-scale rehabilitation shelter for abandoned working dogs. There were only 6 runs in a communal play yard, but the place already felt alive. Ranger was no longer a patient, he was staff. The German Shepherd had gained back much of his weight, and though one leg still showed a slight limp from an old tendon injury, his eyes had sharpened. He moved like a sentinel, watchful, measured. He wore a navy blue collar, now stitched with a custom patch guardian. It had been a gift from Sarah Kendrick, who'd visited during the grand opening just 2 weeks earlier, holding back uncharacteristic emotion as she handed Emily the final permit. Sarah, still dressed in practical utility gear, and still hid her softness behind clipped sentences. But her voice had caught when she'd whispered to Ranger, "You kept your promise." Emily watched now as Ranger crossed the open yard, tail low but relaxed. In the sun near the old maple stump lay Aspen, the name they'd finally chosen for the pup. No longer a fragile bundle of ribs and fear, Aspen had filled out into a strong golden-brown juvenile with bright eyes and boundless energy. His fur had darkened slightly around the muzzle, and he'd taken to chasing moths and sneaking socks from Emily's laundry basket. But today, Aspen wasn't alone. Curled beside him was a new arrival, a mottled gray and white pup, perhaps 6 weeks old, with a limp in one hind leg and nervous eyes. She'd been found 2 nights ago outside a rest stop off the interstate, tied to a crate with a note that read, "Too much for us." The pup had yet to bark, yet to play, but Aspen had taken to her immediately. From the porch, Liam Torres, the young park ranger who had taken Aspen under his wing, leaned against the railing with a warm smile. Liam was 25, lean and quick-footed, with curly black hair he never combed, and a kind face that always seemed one shade from a grin. Though soft-spoken, he moved with quiet confidence, a child of immigrants from New Mexico. Liam had joined the service after volunteering during the flood evacuations 2 years ago, and had bonded deeply with Aspen since day one. She hasn't left his side all morning. Liam called to Emily, even let him nudge her to the water bowl. Emily crossed the grass, crouching near the 2 pups. Aspen had stretched one paw lightly across the new pup's back, a protective gesture so subtle yet unmistakable. Emily reached out slowly, running her fingers through the pup's matted fur. She flinched but didn't retreat. "She's going to be okay," Emily murmured. Behind them, Ranger sat in the shade eyes, never leaving the scene. When Aspen glanced up at him, something passed between them, something unspoken but solid. Ranger gave a low, approving rumble. That night, after the pups had been fed and the yard had quieted under a sky full of stars, Emily stepped outside with a thermos of tea. She found Ranger at the edge of the yard, gazing out across the field, where deer sometimes wandered at dusk. She sat beside him in silence. "Do you know what you've done?" she asked softly. "You gave him a chance, and now he's doing the same for her." Ranger didn't move, but his tail brushed the ground once. "You could have given up," she added, "in the snow, in that cage, in that life, but you didn't." He turned his head slightly, just enough for their eyes to meet. Emily smiled. "You're not just a guardian, you're a teacher." The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of Aspen barking short and playful, followed by the light skitter of paws over gravel. The new pup barked once in return. Emily stood watching the 2 figures race through moonlight and shadows, Aspen always keeping just a step behind the smaller dog, nudging gently when she slowed. From behind her, Ranger let out a soft, satisfied growl. Then he laid down slowly in the grass, head on his paws, and closed his eyes. He wasn't worried anymore. He'd kept his promise. Sometimes God sends angels, not with wings, but with paws. Ranger didn't speak, but he taught us everything about loyalty that doesn't quit love, that doesn't ask for anything in return, and the quiet strength it takes to protect the innocent. In the coldest storm, he became a shield dot. In the darkest moment, he became a light, and through him, we're reminded that even the most broken can be chosen to carry out something sacred. Maybe you felt lost, maybe you've been hurt. But just like Ranger, your pain can lead to someone else's miracle, and sometimes the one who saves is also the one who was saved. If you believe in second chances, if you believe God still works through the humble and the voiceless, then share this story. Leave a comment below and tell us how this touched your heart. If you believe every creature, even the smallest paw, has a divine purpose, even a dog's, subscribe to our channel, Tales of Paws and People, to help us spread more stories of grace, healing, and hope. And may God bless every soul watching this. May you find warmth in the storm and light in the silence.